everyone. I'm Nadya. How are you? Good? Good? So I'm Nadya. I'm 21 years old. I'm a junior at Harvard, and I'm here to talk about menstruation. Yeah? Okay. So I already see some, especially cis boys in the audience looking a little bit uncomfortable. So we'll just kind of just recognize that it's totally normal to feel uncomfortable because there is this period stigma, right? But I'm very passionate about periods and very obsessed with periods, and I know clearly it's not the most common thing to be obsessed with and talk about. So I thought I would start by telling you a little bit about why I'm so passionate about menstruation and why I've sort of really committed my life over the last few years to it. So my passion for periods comes from a really personal place. I founded this organization when I was 16 years old. So in the spring of my freshman year of high school, my mom ended up parting ways with her job, and we entered what I like to call our time of transition, which was essentially several months of not being able to afford to live in our own home, so having to bounce around and live with other people, right? Just trying to make ends meet. And so during this time, my commute to school turned from about 12 minutes on public transportation to about 2 hours on public transportation in Portland, Oregon. And where I would change buses along that route was in an area called Old Town Portland, Oregon, where there were 10 homeless shelters in a 2-block radius. And so I would regularly see these homeless people to and from school, and I mean, this is gonna make me seem really old. But 5 years ago, we didn't have iPhones. We had those little slidey phones. Do you remember those? Yeah? And so the best thing you could do was Snake sometimes, or the Tetris with the one button, you know? So it was at that time, now if I would have there, I would have pulled my phone up, but at the time, it was a lot of sitting and waiting. And as sort of the quirky, extroverted teenager I started getting into conversations with these homeless women a lot of the time. And at the time, I became really fascinated by stories of hardship. I think to try to better understand what my family was going through, to better understand what my family is going through and just distract myself from it. And so I started asking them questions about their backgrounds, right? How did you get here? Do you have a family? Why not? Did you have a job? Did you try to go to school? Why not? What happened? And then I started asking them, what do you find most challenging about your living situations? And that's how I discovered this unaddressed natural need of menstrual hygiene. And I would write down these stories I heard every day in my notebook and collected this sort of accidental anthology of these stories of homeless women using things like toilet paper and socks and brown paper grocery bags and cardboard to take care of their periods. And just to clarify, do we all know what periods are? Yeah? Yeah? No? I hear some no's. Your biology department really needs to address that. But, I'm just saying, with lots of love, if you can have a zoo, you can tell everyone about periods. So, anyways, so to clarify, before I move on, a period is the time of the month, once a month, where the uterine lining sheds, and it often accumulates in once a month blood coming out of your vagina pretty regularly for 4 to 7 days, right? And so that's what a period is. And so basically, I was collecting these stories of homeless women using toilet paper and socks and brown paper grocery bags and cardboard to take care of their periods. And they would show me how they would take a piece off of the cardboard they were sitting on sometimes, take off the sides of the cardboard, rub the middle in between their hands, and use it as a pad. And for me at the time, I had never thought about period poverty. And it was this big privilege check for me. Because even in this time when my family had to mark no permanent address on school forms, and even in this time when we were legally homeless and trying to make ends meet, I never had to use trash to take care of my periods, and I had never thought about period poverty in the first place, right? And so I got kind of angered but obsessed with this idea of period poverty. How bad is this issue, and how could I have gone my whole life, and most of the adults in my life have gone this far and never heard about period poverty or thought about what it's like for someone else to get their period and not have access. So kind of at night, and when I had free time, I started Googling keywords about period poverty. And just by doing that, learned that periods are the #1 reason why girls miss school in developing countries, oftentimes because it's this cultural significance of transitioning from girlhood into womanhood. In many countries, it's also the single event that leads to girls dropping out of school, getting married early, undergoing female genital mutilation, or social isolation. When I started looking more into the issue in the US, I learned about the tampon tax. So now the number's 33, but in 2014, 40 states in the US had a sales tax on period products, considering them luxury items, right? Meanwhile, products like Rogaine and Viagra and penile pumps, which I had to Google what those were, it was very traumatizing. But penile pumps are considered essential goods. right? And so I remember learning this as sort of a budding 16-year-old feminist being like, are you fucking kidding me? Like, what? Like, old man hair growth and erections are considered more of a necessity than over half of our population feeling clean, confident, and capable 100% of the time, right? And so that's really like this anger and this passion of mine was really where it started. So I decided that I needed to do something. After I learned about the tampon tax, I started Googling, could not find a nonprofit that was doing something about period poverty, so I decided to start my own. I did not know what a nonprofit was at the time. I just knew that the word nonprofit is what my mom used to describe doing something good for your community. So I just decided that I wanted to do that. And I went to my mom and I was like, Mom, I'm gonna start a nonprofit. And she was like, okay, before you do that, like skirt back and like it's a lot of work. Maybe try to figure out what are the skills that you don't have that you might need, right? Like Excel, finance, like operations. And so I just identified a co-founder. So there's this kid in my class who I'd never really spoken to, but he had the reputation of being like the first kid done in like math class with the Excel spreadsheet and then like walked around and helped everyone else so the class can move on, right? So I identified that as like my perfect co-founder. So I went up to him, Vince, you can see in the blurry picture behind me. But I went up to him once and I was like, I really want to start this organization. It's about bringing period products to people who need. I'm super excited about it. And he was like, okay, cool. I'm really interested in entrepreneurship as well. Before we can get started, can you just tell me what a period is, right? So as we showed 5 minutes ago, even though over half the population menstruates on an average of 40 years of their life on a monthly basis, and that menstruation makes human life possible, it's still very common that you can get through high school or through above and have never heard about periods if you don't get one, right? And not really know what it is. And I think that's a problem, and that's a big part of what we're trying to change. But Vince and I decided we were going to start this organization with a goal of getting period products to people in need in our own community. So we met at Starbucks that Saturday, and we sat there, like kind of giggling all the time and Googling questions like, what is a nonprofit, and what is the IRS, and what is a board of directors, and how do I start a nonprofit, and just trying to take any action that we could. And like, I really mean it, but we did not know what we were doing. We just decided that we were going to do it anyways. And so first goal was, okay, we need to get period products to 20 homeless women a week because I personally knew 20 homeless women a week. And so then my next thought was, okay, how do I get those products? I have to buy them, so I have to go fundraise. And my family didn't come from money, and so it was a lot of figuring out how I could get people to give me money. And I would try anything. I would like stand on a street corner in Portland, try to play guitar for 4 hours, make 20 bucks, realize that was not a good use of my time. So I started going to places where like people were already forced to be, so like staff meetings. So I would go to like the Fidelity Insurance or the Chase Bank staff meeting, or like the Jiffy Lube auto mechanics store staff meeting. And I would just be like, hey, can I just, like, I'm a student, I just want to try out this project and try out this pitch. Can I talk for like 2 to 5 minutes? And they'd be like, okay, sure. And so I would go and I would start talking about periods and all of these things. And whenever I said the word menstruation or period, similarly to how people giggle, like a lot of the guys, the auto mechanics store people especially, would like drop their sandwiches in disgust, right? They'd be like, menstruation. And for me, it was really motivating because I would see that and be like, you're the problem, right? Like, but I sort of had this reaction of like, oh my gosh, I can't even say the word period, which is like even like a punctuation mark, and people giggle, and like we have to get to a certain point of comfort to talk about real solutions to an issue like period poverty that is seriously holding a lot of people back. So we just started raising money slowly that way. Finally, I got like very frustrated with that model of pitching. So one night I looked online, found every pitch competition in the area and the ones that would fly me out, and won all of them, and started with a small pot of a few $1,000s. And we would just go to stores and buy them out of period products. I would go in with like 3 guy friends. I was on the boys varsity baseball team in high school. And so we would go in with my team and we would like buy them out of period products. And then we would get our friends together and do the simple thing. Put period products in a package and then give them out to homeless people. And when we would go out on our first trip, we would literally have lines of homeless women who were telling us these stories of, we've needed these for decades, we've needed these for so long, and no one has asked us, right? Or we've never felt comfortable to ask for them either. So we realized that a lot of the time, most of the nonprofits we spoke to, or shelters, either didn't provide period products due to a lack of funds or a lack of displayed need. Because these period products are expensive, and so when shelters do have them, they keep them behind the counter and they only give them out upon request. But because periods are uncomfortable to talk about, not everyone feels comfortable going up to often a male authority and saying, hello, I'm menstruating and I need a period product. So it was with this model that we just decided, okay, simple solution, right? Do whatever we could. Get period products, put them together with friends, and then start giving them out to shelters to stock them to give out to other people. So this sort of spider web model. And we just started doing that. We started gathering friends together. I do not know why this is so blurry. Anyways, but we started, just gathering our friends, putting packages together, and then giving them out. And within a few, naturally, as social media became like a daily part of our life, we were just posting on social media to share what we were doing. No real goal of expanding, but just saying we want to share with our family, friends, and around what we're doing. And so we started doing that, and within a few months, we had hundreds of messages from students and journalists around the country who were messaging us on social media saying, we've never heard about this, how do we do this in our own community, right? So we just kind of sat down and thought, okay, let's just write down everything we did in our community in a Google Doc and start distributing it. And so we started just registering chapters and saying, here's what we did in our community, now do this in yours. Within a year, we were a national organization. Within 2 years, we were a global organization. Within 6 months, we had our first national magazine, Spread in 17 magazine, and it just sort of started like snowballing over simply just by using the tools in front of us, right? Using Google to learn when we didn't have questions, using social media, and just mobilizing our friends. And so like this picture up here is actually from our first period con 2 years in, where we just said, okay, let's get our few hundred chapter members around the world and put them all in a room, right? And we just slowly started building this community and calling it the Menstrual movement, right? And we would all kind of band together with this community because we wake up every day so passionate about what we do and walk into rooms where we introduce ourselves and say, hi, I'm here to talk about periods, and people laugh, right? Because it's still uncomfortable. And so a big part of what we're trying to do is just empower people to do whatever they can with the tools in front of them to take action. So slowly but surely we started growing, and I'll tell you a little bit about what we're doing now, but we actually are now the largest youth-run NGO in women's health in the world and the fastest growing nonprofit run by someone under 30 in the United States. And a lot of that work came from simply by just trying to mobilize and invite our friends over, and we actually just made history a few days ago. Dylan, I told you about this first. Dylan was actually the first person I ever told about this idea. But on Saturday, we hosted the first ever National Period Day. So on one day, we had rallies. We had 60 rallies in all 50 states and 4 countries, and had tens of thousands of people mobilizing. And in response to it, we started getting 5 presidential candidates to publicly endorse what we were doing, endorse taking down the tampon tax, and we just took down the tampon tax in Ohio yesterday, which is really good. But it's really exciting because like when I look at this, like I started this a few years ago out of my bedroom with a guy friend who didn't know what a period was, right? And now we're this movement of like over 700 chapters now in all 50 states and 30 countries. So we're now a global youth-run NGO that's fighting to end period poverty and period stigma through service, education, and advocacy. So we distribute products to people in need. We're trying to change the way people think, talk, and learn about periods through education. And we're now fighting for period policy from the local to the national level, actively passing legislation to make period products more accessible. So at the local level, getting period products into schools and school restrooms, and at district level doing that. At the state level, taking down the tampon tax. At the national level, trying to get period products in schools, shelters, and prisons. And also trying to get things like food stamps to cover period products because they don't currently, which is ridiculous. But so this is kind of a trajectory of how we've grown. But so we started, just doing whatever we could, get like just literally me, Vince, and like my sisters and like just our friends distributing product and registering chapters, and then started going up a little bit more. And now where we are about almost to the end of 2019. To date, we've addressed over 950,000 periods through product distribution and registered over 700 campus chapters at universities and high schools in all 50 states and 30 countries, and I hope there's a chapter here later, yeah. But so when I think about why I care about the menstrual movement and why I think everyone should care about the menstrual movement, for me, it's not about periods, actually. For me, the end goal has nothing to do with periods. For me, I do this work because I think that addressing menstrual hygiene in this movement is a key to achieving global development and gender equality. And I know that sounds like a big claim, but I'll explain it. I'll break it down. Okay, so when you look at how the World Health Organization and the United Nations define gender equality, the factors really fall into these 4 buckets of education, healthcare, economic mobility, representation in politics and decision-making. I've already talked about how this is a matter of healthcare, right? Like when people don't have access to period products, they're often forced to use things that are not good for their bodies and can often lead to more serious symptoms like toxic shock syndrome or like very, very irritating rashes or anything like that. At the same time, a lot of the work that we're doing is try to talk about things like period pain and like endometriosis. And endometriosis is a condition that 10% of women in the United States have. The majority of them don't know that they have it because it's hard to diagnose. But it means when you get your period, you are in so much pain you literally cannot stand. And it's hard to like fully participate in school or work or anything like that. Also, it's a matter of education. We actually just released a national study last week with Thinks in the Harris Poll, and we found that 1 in 5 teens don't have access to period products consistently, and 84% of teens in America have either missed class or know someone who has missed class due to a lack of access to period products. So this issue of access to school and equal opportunity in school because of period poverty is much bigger than we anticipated, both in the United States and of course abroad as well. On the factor of economic mobility, a big part of what we try to do is just come from this idea that it's a fundamental human right to be able to discover and reach your full potential regardless of a natural need, right? We regularly work with homeless women who, when they don't have access to period products, don't feel that confidence to be able to go out for the new job, right? Or if they don't have constant access to a shower or clean clothes, for them it might be easier that when they get their period, they just sit in one place and don't take advantage of opportunities for social mobility. Lastly, can you hear me? Maybe? A little bit? I'll just yell. Okay. Lastly, this is an issue, like throughout history, periods have been a reason why women can't hold high positions of power or like run for office, right? This is shown as like arguments for why women can't be in the front lines of combat because our hormones are off balance and we won't make judgment calls well. There were numerous op-eds actually published in mainstream media outlets about why in 2016 Hillary Clinton could not be president because 25% of the time she'd be menstruating, right? Meanwhile, Hillary Clinton was a decade too old to get her period, which just goes to show a little bit more of like the education that's needed. But when you see here, when we look at how gender equality is defined into these 4 buckets, like I've walked through how period poverty and addressing the period stigma is a serious obstacle for all of those things. So I'm not saying it's like we solve this and we solve gender equality. No, I'm saying we need to talk about period poverty and talk about period stigma as we talk about this overall fight for gender equality. And we're not going to fully achieve gender equality unless we talk about periods and talk about it more decently. So from my perspective, what we're really trying to do is kind of fight for this approach in like a 3-pronged model. So 1, empowering young period warriors. So I'm 21. We now have a lot of full-time staff and people who are much older than me, but primarily our staff are a lot of young people. And all of our interns are young people. High school and college students really drive this process. The people that we go send to meet with governors and everything, all high school and college students, and some middle school students. Secondly, repeal the tampon tax. That's something we're really focused on. 33 more states to go. And if you ever want to get involved, hit me up because we're always looking for people to rally for the tampon tax.
Your belt pack died.
Oh, okay. Can you? I thought you were going to come up and be like, I'm going to fight for the tampon tax. Me. Can you hear me okay if I just talk like this? Okay. Oh, but can you hear me? Okay, you're good, you're good. You can hear me? Okay, cool. So then lastly, a big part of what we're trying to do is end period poverty in schools, right? And I know it might seem like a little bit of a daring fight for what we're trying to do, but what we're really trying to say is that period products should be treated just like toilet paper. If you walked into a bathroom and there was no toilet paper, you'd be kind of fucking pissed. Oh, sorry. But you'd be kind of pissed. And what we're trying to say is periods are just as natural and come just as unexpectedly, right? So why shouldn't these be provided for free? Why shouldn't these be provided in all restrooms so that when people need them, they have access to them? So when I think about how we're going to change this, I really think that long-term solutions to human services is in policy. Like, it keeps me up at night realizing that, God forbid if I disappeared and my whole team disappeared, the same people that we're serving will still need period products, right? It's the same thing if you think about like serving out food or like, serving out school supplies. Like, if you don't change it in policy, you're not making long-term change. That being said, we regularly meet with politicians who will tell us behind closed doors, yes, I believe with you, I don't agree with the tampon tax, but I'm not gonna say it publicly because I will lose voters if I talk about periods, right? Because of this stigma, because when we talk about periods and it makes people uncomfortable and they don't wanna talk about it, we still have these issues. And so kind of what we're trying to say is service is our short-term solution, but our long-term solution is policy, and the bridge that helps us get there is by redefining, like, this cultural change. Like, before we can change policy, we have to change culture, which means talking about periods and redefining periods so that we acknowledge menstrual hygiene as a right and not a privilege. So that's one of the reasons I ended up writing a book. So which is still kind of weird to me, don't actually identify as an author because this was just like a bunch of Google Docs a year ago. Anyways, so basically a year and a half ago, I kind of got to this place of being like, I really want adults to take us seriously. Like, I feel like this movement is growing really fast. By that point, we had like 150, 200 chapters, and I was like, what is it in this world that makes adults be like, okay, this movement is real? And I started studying like feminist theory, looking at second and third wave feminism, like Gloria Steinem, these icons who led these feminist movements throughout history, realizing there was always this like defining document of like a manifesto, right? The Riot Girl Manifesto, Red Stocking Manifesto of second and third wave feminism, like these texts that united everyone together. So I decided one night that I wanted to write a book. So I Googled how to write a book. And I ended up downloading Google images of what a book proposal looked like, learned about what a literary agent is, and then in one night wrote a book proposal and cold emailed it to like 100 literary agents while I was like watching Grey's Anatomy or something like that. And ended up getting a lot of rejections, but then got picked by my favorite literary agent who helped represent one of my favorite books. And then a year later, I published my first book. And so I just published my first book called Period Power, a Manifesto for the Menstrual Movement. I'm going to sign copies outside after with publisher Simon & Schuster. And when my book came out, it really did add a lot of legitimacy to this movement, because suddenly we weren't just a bunch of teenagers mobilizing, but we could walk into rooms and it wasn't just a school project, people thinking we were Girl Scouts anymore. No shade to Girl Scouts. But like, we were walking in and being like, okay, we have a book, like we mobilize this many people, we've served X number of people in need, we have this many students involved, like you have to take us seriously now. And so that's been a big part of what we're trying to do, and I'm really excited to keep taking the menstrual movement and where we want to go. When I zoom out and think about like what brought us to this place of organizing and success in the menstrual movement, I kind of try to like think about how we got here, because in a lot of ways, in complete honesty, I don't really know how we got here. Like, I didn't feel like I knew what I was doing when I started, and I still don't really feel like I know what I'm doing, but I think I just realized that I don't think anyone knows what they're doing. But the trick is you just have to do it anyways, right? Like, the biggest thing that's gonna hold you back is just not thinking that you can do it. So when I think about like what are the core tenets of mindset that kind of help me bring me to where I am, I kind of broke it down to 4 things. 1, just go for it. This actually used to be just do it, but I recently signed with Adidas as a model, so I can't say that anymore. So it's just go for it. And I mean this by what I was saying. Like, it's just like, I meet hundreds, so I'm on speaking tour right now, so I go to Harvard on Mondays, and then I'm on a plane every day speaking and meeting all these people. And I meet all these people of all ages who always tell me, I have this idea, I want to start a business, but I've been thinking for years about what the first step is, and I don't know what the right first step is. How do you incorporate? How do you start an organization? My answer is, just Google it, but also like you just have to go for it. If you keep having that mentality of like questioning your first step or anything, just know that there is no cookie cutter step. You just have to go for it. Secondly, ask questions. This work is extremely humbling because every day I'm schooled on what I don't know, right? Every day I surround myself by people who challenge me and make me feel dumb a lot of the times, but also like catalyze this excitement to learn more, right? And constantly ask questions. Respect experience. Find mentors, cold email people who you really look up to, and just say, like, I've really been looking up to you and I just want to learn from you. Dylan, I actually have looked up to for a really long time. She runs this thing called Makers Women that makes all these inspiring videos. And actually this one night I spent at a homeless shelter because I ended up at a homeless shelter for a little while because I got really beat up by a boyfriend at the time. To kind of get through that, I started watching all these videos, and Makers was one of them, and I very much DM'd their social media account a lot of times because I was just like, respect experience, right? Find mentors. If people inspire you, talk to them about it, right? If you think you can learn something from me, DM me, text me, right? You'll be surprised by the number of people in high up places who don't get a lot of messages like that, right? Because everyone's like, I want to reach out, but they'll never respond, so then they don't get messages, right? But be fearless about finding mentors. Lastly, use the tools right in front of you. I kind of joke about like just Google it, right? But I really mean it, right? We're in a very privileged position to be able to have Google and social. I mean, I guess your school takes it away from you after like 11 p.m. it sounds like, but during sunlight hours, you're in a really privileged position, right? So if you have questions and you are wondering things about something, or if you're just trying to look for inspiration, chances are it's right in front of you, right? And what are the tools in front of you that you can take, right? Like there's a lot of these misconceptions about like, you need a certain amount of money to start something, you need amount of certain resources. And yes, to a certain extent that's true. There are people in this world who don't have access to internet all the time. There are people who don't have access to the time to be able to put into entrepreneurship. But I'm telling you, you guys go to this school, you have the resources, okay? And like there is a certain point where you can't make those excuses anymore. So if you have this idea that you want to go for, just go for it. So when I think about like what those lessons have taken me into like other adventures of my life, and this is where I'm going to veer away from periods a little bit, but there are a few other things that like I really hold, those 4 lessons I hold within me that's taken me into these new adventures, like running for office. So when I was a freshman at Harvard, I started going out runs in the morning, and I got really obsessed with going on runs and finding these like lines of gentrification in the city, right? And I would find these intersections, and I would like stand there and be like, wow, I've never seen gentrification so clearly like this. Where on like one side of the road, it was like all these huge mansions where like the white Harvard professors lived, and on the other side, it was like public housing, like overcrowded housing, all people of color, like all the storefronts in another language, and it was a clear line. And I got really fascinated and obsessed with this idea of gentrification in the city and curious about why it was so apparent and why I didn't hear other students talking about it. So, and I swear I have friends when I say this, but like in my free time, I would sit by myself and Google things. And I ended up downloading every publicly accessible report on housing inequality, like income inequality, just trying to learn more. And I started writing down the facts that really invigorated something in me, right? I would write down like, the median market price of a single family home in Cambridge is $1.625 million, but over 50% of the public school students are at or below the poverty line, right? I was writing down these things that were really inspiring or angering to me, but then I ended up with an 80-page Word document about what I thought city council could be doing better. And I realize now that this is a little bit of a petty way to go about politics, but I started taking this document to city councilors and saying, hi, I have these ideas, like, can I be involved, right? Like, can we get students involved? We live in a city with Harvard and MIT and all of these well-endowed institutions. Like, why can't students get involved? And here are the ideas of like, I have experience with housing instability, so when you're talking about housing affordability, can I offer my opinion, right? And slowly they would meet with me, but after a few months or like a few weeks, it was like, if you have so many ideas, why don't you run yourself, right? They would kind of dismiss me, literally be like, okay, like Nadia's here again, you know? And so I started joking back with them, okay, if I run, like you'll endorse me, right? And like, okay, if I run, like can you come canvass with me, whatever? And then finally I got fed up, so I Googled what it took to run for office. And I learned that in order to run for office, you have to be 18 years old. So I sat there being like, I'm more than qualified, I'm 19. So I ended up downloading the forms, getting enough signatures, and becoming a candidate for city council. I convinced like 7 of my friends to turn down their paid summer internships. And together we lived in a 2-bedroom apartment and ran for office together. And we ran against 26 other candidates and for 9 seats up for re-election. And we just did the damn thing. Like we would literally, like we all sat there. It was my first time ever being involved in a political campaign ever, right? So we were constantly Googling, like constantly trying to call up other people, other Congress people, other staffers, just being like, we just need help, right? And so slowly but surely we started to run for office, and we didn't end up winning, but we made history with student and youth turnout and did rather well because we were able to mobilize so many student voters. And when I ran, I think the biggest lesson that it taught me was to be unapologetically myself, right? And to be just persevere in the face of like exhaustion or denial, right? Because when I ran for office, I kind of went in being so passionate about housing affordability, not thinking about the consequences of the passion people have about not wanting young people to be involved in politics. So when I ran for office, I made a video and I just posted it online, went to sleep. The next morning it had gone like completely viral. Like lots and lots of messages of support from all over the country. It was like a few months after Trump won the election. And so we were getting all of these messages of support like, yes, we need more young people. We need more young women of color in running for office. Like, go you. But for the next 9 months, we woke up every day to hate and death threats. And what we realized is completely by accident, I became the youngest Asian American to run for office in the history of the United States. And so people were tweeting, calling us the Asian invasion, a one-person fucking Asian invasion, you know? And like, we had to wake up every day being like, we deserve to have a seat at the table. We deserve to be heard. It doesn't matter that we're 19, because watch, we can knock on more doors than any other candidate in the race. We knocked on 24,000 doors. It was exhausting. But we can mobilize and we can really make a difference. And like, this is what it looks like. And I'm really excited because now it's the next election year and we're seeing more people run for office as well. But I think running for office, like, it really taught me to be unapologetically myself, because all these people who were trying to support me, like political consultants would fly into Cambridge, like stand me on a table and then walk around and tell me how they could help me win by changing things about me, right? One political consultant would be like, wear jeans, don't wear jeans, cuss, don't cuss, wear makeup, don't wear makeup, put your hair up, put your hair down. Like, however they were trying to help me, they were trying to change me, right? And so when I realized the only way to really commit to this work was if I just focused on what we were trying to do and just went forward with it, right? At the same time, when I was experiencing like this visceral racism for the first time, it was something that I had never really experienced before, because I grew up between New York and Portland, Oregon. And Portland is the whitest major city in the United States, right? Where it's all this, like, a lot of microaggressions where, like, my white teachers would be like, oh, honey, we don't even recognize you're a different color. You know, like, there's a lot of, like, underhanded racism. And so I think a big part of what I grew up with was just trying to deny that I was different, right? And try to assimilate in any way. And that was, like, being insecure about my eye size. And, like, in middle school, I would wake up 2 hours early to put on more eyeliner because I wanted my eyes to be bigger. And, like, look back at my school pictures, I look like a raccoon. You know, like, all these little things, right? But then, so when I ran for office, I was like, I'm not running as an Asian person. I'm running as a student and a young person. But we were getting all this hate because of my race, but I also was getting a lot of support. We were being flown out to conferences where I was standing on stages and people were like, the future of Asian Americans, you know? And I had to get up and say, I don't know what it means to be Asian American, and I didn't grow up feeling excited about being Asian. I actually grew up feeling really ashamed of being Asian. Like, I'm half Japanese and half Taiwanese. There's a lot of tension there. But also, like, I grew up with those comments from other people that made me hate being Asian American and not even want to identify as that. So a big part of me running for office was learning not only the responsibility that I had, because I learned that Asian Americans are the fastest growing minority population in the United States, but more underrepresented at all levels of government than any other racial group, right? So that responsibility of all of it, but also like the experience of what it looks like when people tell you you don't deserve a seat at the table because of who you are, where you come from. So running for office was a big experience of learning, jumping into a field where like I did not know what we were doing. We did rather well, and it was also an experience of, I think, just learning to be unapologetically myself, which is something that I really carry with me today. With all my work with Period and running for office, as people started to notice, as big companies started to notice how fast Period was growing, I started getting called into offices of corporations and brands that I really was obsessed with, who were asking me, how did you do it, right? How, with like little money and little resources, did you grow this movement? How did you involve all these young people? Like, they wanted to know these secrets, and they started to look at me and look at my co-founders as like tastemakers, right? If we can choose the right social media post, if we can choose the right ad, maybe we will help them engage young people. So we started to recognize the power of representing Gen Z, and I would always find myself in these rooms where it's like a bunch of corporate execs and then like usually like an older white gentleman in the corner who was the youth expert, right? Who would like not talk to another young person in a really long time and like did not know what a finsta was, but was the youth expert, right? And so what we started doing was I just started going with some friends being like, okay, fine, I'll give you my time, like pay me and I will talk to you about what I like. I'll bring in some of my friends and we'll just talk about it. And so what I think we started recognizing was really reflecting on like what makes Gen Z special. So Gen Z is anyone born after 1996, so I'm pretty sure everyone here is Gen Z. But so for me, like why I'm so passionate about Gen Z and like the believe in the power of us comes down to these 4 things. 1, we are big. We are the largest segment of a population in the history of the world. We are 32% of the global population. We are 46% of the total media audience, and on social media, we're about 60% of that media audience. So when you think about where brands and politicians are trying to reach people, we're almost the majority of that audience. Second, we are driven change makers. Over 80% of us look at the world and are frustrated by it, right? Just like mad about the situation that we're in and feel a heightened level of individual responsibility to do something about it. And I think that's why we see these movements like March for Our Lives and the climate strikes led by young people for the most part. 3, we know the digital world. 80% of 10-year-olds now have a smartphone. Isn't that crazy, right? Social media is not just something that we do. For a lot of us, social media has become like an extension of our self-expression, right? This idea of if you didn't put it on Snap, like did it really happen? You know, but like living and breathing social media in a lot of ways. Lastly, we are rather socially progressive, right? We have a few nicknames. One is the plurals. Gen Z is the plurals, because when we form our own political opinions, we're not just thinking about what's best for yourself and your own career trajectory, but you're thinking about like what is best for example, like something that has to do with all of your identities, right? So like, what is best for all low-income students? What is best for all Asian, like what is best for like my identity as a whole and overall populations? Secondly, our other nickname is the Genderless Generation, because less than 50% of us identify as totally heterosexual or cisgender, right? So we are this generation that is starting to question gender and race as social constructs and really understand that gender and race are two separate things, right? And that when you walk in and you express what your gender pronouns are, that's something that you have to respect and that we understand as fact, right? And so kind of these notions of Generation Z that are starting to happen and that brands are starting to really try to understand. So as I started to do this work and working with these big companies and working with like companies that I had never dreamed of, right? And then suddenly I started meeting other young people who are also doing this, other young activists and people in the space who are also consulting. And we would all get together and joke about like, you know, these stories, these questions that we were getting. We would joke about how some companies would bring us like campaigns that just said lit everywhere and they thought it would like make young people love them, right? But like just these stories of like, how do we bring this together and make this real, right? And so we all got together last year actually, and so we started a new company. So last year we reincorporated and we co-founded Juve Consulting, which is a Gen Z marketing agency. Our oldest person at the company is 23 years old. Our youngest person is 14 years old. And we just opened up headquarters in Times Square, which is so exciting, last year. And so what we do is we work now with small companies all the way up to over 30 Fortune 500 companies, working with them on how to understand Gen Z, right? And we build social campaigns, we build the influencer marketing and everything. And what we do with these clients is we have a roster of 100 consultants between the ages of 14 and 23, and we employ them and then we deploy them out to work with corporate executives, asking them like, how do you understand Gen Z? How do you market to Gen Z? How do you build these products for Gen Z? And so we're working with these big brands about how just telling them like, instead of studying young people and putting us in glass boxes and treating us like guinea pigs and studying us, just talk to us directly and come up with solutions, right? So I wanted to share all of this because I think for me, in everything I've done with, whether it be nonprofit or book or running for office or business, like all of it, like I'm very new to. These are all my first experiences in these fields, right? And I think a big part of it, like I don't feel unique from other people. I think I am a little bit of a workaholic, but like, I think for me it really was like I had the same tools, and I think it's just taking that leap and just going for it. So when I think about what keeps me going and like where this drive comes from, I think it comes from a place of just feeling really, really honored and excited about this work, right? I really mean it when I say that activism and period and starting that as an experience like saved my life when I was 16. When I was 16, I was not in a very good place. My family was experiencing housing instability, and from talking to a lot of the homeless women that I mentioned earlier and hearing their stories of domestic violence and sex abuse, I realized for the first time that I grew up with that too. So when I was 16, I started realizing that my relationship with my dad had been sexually abusive my whole life. And when I was 16, as I started to start period actually around the same time, I found myself in a really abusive relationship where rape, sexual, and physical assault were a daily part of my life. And I would navigate the world thinking that that was something that maybe I deserved, right? That was something that felt so familiar to me that I didn't know anything else that was normal. At the same time, I think as a young woman, I started to think that my self-worth came from my body and how it could be used by others and what it could offer others. And what period taught me, and actually what the experience of like being in that Jiffy Lube auto mechanic store, seeing people drop their sandwiches, what it made me realize is that there is power in someone's voice, and that in 2 minutes I could take someone from being so uncomfortable to talk about periods to wanting to do something about it, right? I hope that I can walk into this room and I can say I'm here to talk about menstruation and people laugh, and I hope that you all walk out of this room feeling like you need to normalize the conversation about periods a little bit more and own this as an issue as well. But so for me, this work has taught me that as a young person, regardless of what I've been through and what my background is, like my self-worth and everyone's self-worth doesn't come from your body, but it comes from the voice that you have and the potential that you have to mobilize others. And that's something I carry with me every day, and that's something that I live and breathe, and I feel so excited to do this work because I get to come and talk to all of these incredible young people about like your ideas and hear your stories. And so I just want to end by saying thank you for listening to me rant, and also just that I want to stand here before you and make the commitment that like I'm here to support you in whatever you need, right? If you have an idea, if you want to get involved in period, if you want to start a business, if you want to see what Juve Consulting looks like, if you want to come by our headquarters, anything like that, like just reach out to me. Like I promise you I will respond to every DM if they're nice. Like I will always respond to DMs because for me like the things that took me further were people who looked at me and said, okay, I believe in you, and like I'm gonna pull you up with me, and that's what I wanna do for all of you. So please feel free to connect with me on social media, and thank you so much for listening to me. Of course,
Good job, thank you.
Thank you.
and then after the forum, there should be some food out in the lobby and a book signing. But really, I want to open it up to the floor and just help direct Nadia if you do have any questions out there.
Ask me anything. Yeah.
What did your classmates think in high school when you started this, like your peers and teachers?
So I remember very distinctly, like the first time, well, because obviously I was like, I'm going to start with my school and mobilize my school. I went to a school really similar to this, actually. I went to a school with 300 kids, like private school in Portland, Oregon, like one of like 3 people of color in the whole school. And like, I remember I came in and I presented about what I was doing, and same thing, when I talk about, hi, I'm here to talk about periods, it was like laughter, right? And it was like a lot of getting through that. I think one of the key differences, though, was that even 5 years ago, youth activism was not as prevalent as it was today, right? Now when we talk about youth activism, we are all familiar with incredible young activists like Malala, Greta, March for Our Lives, Me Too movement, Black Lives Matter. Youth activism has become so prevalent. When we started, it was not, right? When we started, when we would walk into rooms, like if I were to walk in this room 5 years ago, people would be like, why is she up there? Like even peers would be like, I don't understand. Like now it's incredible that it's normalized to have young people come in and speak, right? It's incredible that we can have young people testify in state houses and make policy change and have these platforms of making change. But 5 years ago, it was really not, and I think that that's something that I really noticed today. Yeah. Yeah.
Not get discouraged when people would laugh or get disgusted when you started to talk about periods?
So for me, it's just really motivating, like in complete honesty. Like, I love being like, hi, I'm here to talk about periods, and I love seeing, like, so especially some of you, like, I assume that, like, you guys are, like, the first year. Like, yeah, like, much love, so much love, but, like, for me, it's motivating. Like, when I walk in and I say that I'm here to talk about periods, and I believe so strongly, like, I really, really believe that menstruation is so natural. I'm not telling people to look at menstruation as this magical thing. I'm just saying to look in it as normal, Like, it's why human life exists and, like, what makes human life possible. Like, for me, and I think, for me, I find it motivating. Like, when I see people be like, ugh, I don't want to talk about periods, I'm like, oh, okay, like, we need to talk. Like, we're about to get to it. Like, I get really excited about it. And I think it's also, like, I think I really do believe in this work because I think that changing this stigma is so simple, right? Like, when you explain what periods are to people and you explain the effects of period poverty, it's actually really abnormal that I still have a hater that hates me by the end of that conversation, right? Because I can look at them and say, you either know someone or you love someone who gets their period, or you're here because menstruation exists, right? And if you think that you believe that men and women are equal, or all genders, you have to believe in talking about periods, right? And sometimes all it takes is just getting people to hear the word period and normalize it, right? Like, we all know that there's these nicknames, like time of the month, the rag, like PMS, like menstruating, like there's all these nicknames for it. And I think so much of the solution is simple. It's just like, let's just talk about it, like periods. It's not a bad word, yeah.
So I know that period's been recognized as a global organization, a global movement. What more of like global actions have like period been doing?
Yeah, so we currently have chapters in about 34 countries. I would say that a big part of our model is to like provide them all the resources and the toolkits that we have and let the organizers on the ground do what they want with it, right? I think something I'm really critical of is looking at other global organizations that have this sort of like white savior complex of being like, this solution worked here and it's gonna work everywhere, right? And so I think a lot of what we're trying to do is say, here's what we do in our community and from what we understand, here's what we did, and like take with it, model it, customize it, and do it what you want, right? So we have like 16 chapters around India who are running like educational workshops in a different way, right? And some of them are like in Kenya, we have a few chapters that are going out and like running workshops with only boys and talking to them about periods. And I think it's just customizing it in any way. Yeah.
This one up there. Harrison?
Yeah. Oh.
I was wondering that, so between now and when you started the period movement, you said that 7 states have basically moved period products from being a luxury tax, right?
Yeah.
Was your organization a big part of like the lobbying, for lack of a better word,
Yeah.
those political organizations?
Yeah. So the question was about tampon tax. Also, thank you for asking the question and saying period so many times. I love that. Yeah, so the question is so since I started the organization, we went from 40 states to 33 states that don't have the tampon tax. Ohio is the one that came down a few days ago, and that's the one where like our chapter like was like they did that, right? Like they were lobbying like for years, right? I would hope that we had some sort of effect on other things. Like obviously like laws change because of so many different things, like media and everything. A big part of what we were trying to do is just talk about the tampon tax nonstop. Like we would meet with legislators and be like, did you know that tampon tax exists, right? Like the majority of legislators just don't know that it's happening, right? They're paying the tax and they don't know. So a big part of what we were trying to do is just talk about it on social media, and I hope that had an effect in some way. Yeah. We're actually launching phase 2 of our campaign this Sunday, so reach out to me if you're interested, where we brought on a lobbying group and everything, and we're gonna like really tackle the tampon tax in like the next year. Yeah. Thank you. Any other questions? Yeah.
If this applies to implemented in public spaces like the public schools and wherever else you guys have in mind, do you know or have like an estimate on how much it costs the U.S. government?
So it totally depends on what scale that we're talking about it at, right? Like I think that it really varies in terms of like which places you want period products in and all of that. And I think that's kind of like our next phase of what we're trying to figure out. We just actually did the first 2 comprehensive studies on period poverty and period stigma last week that just came out. And now the next phase is figuring out, okay, when we look at that need, how do we figure out how much that will cost and everything? But what we're seeing is that we've passed 12 pieces of legislation in the last 2 months at the district and state level around period products in schools. And what we're finding is that while it's scary, like the biggest pushback is the cost, especially from Republicans, is like, but what we're able to show is that it actually doesn't make that much of a hindrance because it comes out of the same budget as toilet paper, which is a rather flexible budget. Yeah.
Given the proportion of students in this room, do you maybe want to speak a bit on how you balance the workload of being a full-time student with all these projects you're running?
Yeah. Oh gosh, I am not a balanced person. I am not the example of self-care, let me just tell you. I am trying. For me, I'll give you some tips. So first of all, I think it is like really thinking about where you want to put your time, right? Like when I was like a freshman in college, I had like never partied before. I like tried all this partying, and it was like I did it, and then I was like I got tired of it, right? And I think now where I am in my life, I think like for me, I really choose my work, right? So it does come with sacrifice, right? Like I don't go out every weekend. Like I choose why I want to do this, and for me, it's really, really fulfilling. I will also say that like I have this mentality of whenever I have a free moment or like when I'm bored, like I'm never really bored because anytime I feel any amount of boredom, I just like think about what more I could be doing, right? And I think a lot of it is also thinking about, like for me, I live by to-do lists. I'm trying to do this in a way that's like not advocating for unhealthy habits, but like for me, like, okay, 2 things. First of all, I live by to-do lists. This is so nerdy, but like, let's see. I carry notebooks like this everywhere with me, and it literally is just like to-do lists. And like, it's literally just like I'd be on phones and I'll just have this next to me and keep writing down things that I have to do. And for me, why I don't really get stressed about it because a friend told me about a year ago, I was like, how do you not get stressed? And he was just like, I just think of stress as a waste of time. And that changed my life completely. Because what I realized is like the biggest thing I hate is wasting time. And what I realized is it's true. It's like sometimes I would look at my to-do list years ago when I was like 18 and just like have a panic attack, be like, oh my God, I have so much to do. And then I would like walk around and like be on the floor, like be like, I have so much to do. Now I just think like time is gonna keep going, and the only thing I can do is just like focus on this one thing, get through it. And then it's like, yeah, I fucking did that. Yeah, go me, like pat myself on the back, you know? But for me, like having a to-do list is like very, very critical for me of like putting down tangibly what I have to get done, and then like making marks of like, okay, I'm gonna go to sleep here, and then like get that done, and then feel really good about it. The other thing for me is like, I had a really hard time getting enough sleep, especially when I was running for office, was like thinking of sleep as a waste of time, and that's something that will catch up with you. Like I learned very hard junior year of high school, not sleeping enough. Like junior year of high school, I crashed, like passed out in the kitchen and was like rushed to the hospital in ambulance for exhaustion, right? Just like sleep-induced coma for exhaustion, you know? So I really learned like the necessity of needing to sleep a lot, and it's something that I really carry with me. Like no matter what, I will get 6 hours of sleep, and I highly recommend that all of you download the app Sleep Cycle. Do you guys know Sleep Cycle? Yes. So I like live by Sleep Cycle. It's this app where you can like just put it on near your bed and it'll tell you like your percentage score of how good you got your sleep. And I'm so competitive with myself that I'm like always try to beat myself in getting better sleep. So I love Sleep Cycle as like a way to do that. And then the last thing I'll just say is like balance with self-care is like every day I take at least an hour and a half to like just be in my own world and focus on myself. So no matter what, I will always work out like an hour or two a day. And so whether that's boxing or, you know, going to the gym or, you know, going and lifting or anything, like physical activity is something that keeps me really centered. Yeah. Yeah.
Can you describe the core members of your team that will still down?
For Period? Yeah. So Period has about 5 full-time staff. So at our headquarters in Portland, Oregon, so it's me, and then I have a managing director who kind of runs the operations, a development director who runs all of the like fundraising and making sure that we get the money, a programs director who kind of oversees like the development of all programs, and then we have a service director that we have about like 6 warehouses full of Period products. We work directly with all the major manufacturers of product, and so we field them and then we distribute them. So she does that, and we're kind of getting ready to bring on a few more. Yeah. Yeah.
So you ran for office in Cambridge. Like, are you considering at all, like maybe in your future doing more like political
Yeah.
work like that?
I definitely love doing the political work, and I think right now, like my political love is being filled by like lobbying the Tampon Tax and things like that. Like I work on policy nonstop every day. That being said, I don't feel like I want to run for office again or like anytime soon, because because I think that what running for office taught me is that like I'm so passionate about what I'm passionate about, right? Like I'm so passionate about gender equality. When I was running for office, I was really passionate about housing affordability. I have so much respect for politicians because when I ran, I had to be on like twice a week do debates where the majority of questions were about like liquor licenses and parking lanes and potholes and the trash pickup and all of these things that are really important to civic life, but that I'm not like fired up about, right? And so what I think that I recognize is like some people can do that, but for me, I'm so passionate about what I'm passionate about and really pushing for change. If there was a place where like I didn't think anyone else was gonna run for office and like I was the only one who could and I could uniquely offer, like yeah, of course I would do it. But like at this moment, it's not like I wanna run, yeah. Yeah.
I know you said that like when people react like in a disgusted way, it motivates you. But has there ever been a time where you like just completely felt so defeated, and like if so, like how'd you pull yourself out of it?
Yeah. So I felt that way on Sunday and then this morning. Like it's very common, right? I think the more success you'll feel, and I don't know, some of you guys might have this now, is like imposter syndrome, right? Like this feeling of even when you get success, you're like, I don't deserve this. Like they made a mistake, I should not be here. Like I feel that way about Harvard sometimes. I'm like, I am stupid. Like I don't deserve to be here. I don't understand this page, you know? Like, but I think for me, I feel that a lot with period success sometimes. And the hardest thing for me is it doesn't bother me when people are like, okay, so we were trending on Twitter on Saturday for National Period Day. 5 presidential candidates tweeted about it. So I was getting thousands of notifications like a minute from like KKK, like trolls, and Breitbart wrote 2 articles about us. It was a whole thing. The people were being like, the biggest comment was National Period Day. What's next? Diarrhea Day? Like all of these things. Like people were like so upset about it, like saying that we were like over sexualizing. That stuff doesn't bother me actually, because for me, I'm like, it's just like they're not taking me seriously. I'm not going to take them seriously, right? What bothers me the most is as my star has risen, as Period has gained more success, some of my original mentors don't like me anymore, right? And there's this sort of jealousy, especially around like the feminist activism of like women to women, right? And that's why I'm really passionate about, with Period, like women supporting women, because some of my biggest mentors, like the people who wrote the books about periods before me, who I would cold email and be like, I'm so inspired by you. And we would have like weekly calls to check in because I was so inspired by them. And they'd be like, cultivate me, cultivate me. As soon as I got a bigger book deal, as soon as Period became 30 times as big as them, like as soon as we got bigger, suddenly it was like, you're stealing our thing, you're erasing us, you're taking our work, plagiarism, like calling my publisher, trying to like take my book down. It was like, it's a whole thing. That's the stuff that hurts me the most. Because for me, I'm like, we could be on the same team. We are on the same team, like we could do so much together. Another thing that hurts me is like when I think when other people my age like question my intentions, right? Like there is a lot of like excitement and sometimes money and clout that comes with when you start doing this work. And I think a lot of people will post publicly that they don't believe that I'm doing this because I'm really passionate about it, right? And I think when you are so passionate about something, when someone questions your intentions, that's the thing that hurts me the most. So like even this morning, I woke up to these tweets from like some girl I went to middle school with who was completely irrelevant. I know that's mean, but it's like I should not have been affected by it, but it still gets to me, right? And like I'm still a human, and like I still read that, and for me it's like, if I've done this much work and like really put myself into it, like the last thing I want is people questioning the intentions behind it. And I think, of course, like I feel discouraged all the time. And then I come in, I do something like this, and I meet like you. Having dinner with you is like the highlight of my whole year. Like you meet people who inspire you and who have like this. I'm gonna cry. If you cry, I'm gonna cry. But you know, like who have this energy and like you're just inspired and like I want to work with you and I want you to start a chapter. And I'm just like I won't be discouraged anymore. Yeah. I don't know if that made any sense. Yeah.
I was wondering how you get involved in Juve Consulting.
Oh, yeah, so with Juve Consulting, so it's completely separate from Period. First of all, you can email me, like, my email, that's my email, and I can send you more information. It's juveconsulting.com. But the best way to get involved is actually with our Vine network. So one of the offerings that we have to our companies is that we will send out real-time surveys to like thousands of young people, and then like their insights are directly taken into like building these new campaigns and like understanding Gen Z. Visco is we just did a big study with Visco. We just did something with Bumble. Like I just signed Sony Music. Like it's really exciting. And then the other way is like we will keep our social media and everything updated with job postings. So when we do have openings for consultant teams or senior partners, like you can just reach out to us. Yeah. Yeah.
Where did all the research, like the study of the statistics came from?
From Period.
Yeah, from Period. Like,
Yeah.
was someone investing in that field, or
Yeah.
you were just Googling?
No, well, obviously I was Googling, but like when I was doing this work and as we started doing more policy and applying for bigger grants, one of the big questions you get is, okay, if you want all this money, what is it for, right? What is the need, right? How many people need period products? And I kept Googling and realizing there was no research about it. Like even when I was writing my book, I was like, a lot of it was just kind of deciphering a lot of the research because there wasn't a lot of comprehensive research. So after my book came out, I was like, okay, we're gonna fix that and like we're gonna go hustle and like go get a study for this. So I started going to the big companies who I knew had money and going to these research firms and like basically showing up and annoying them until like they agreed to do it, essentially. But eventually like just kind of selling them that like, we really needed this, and then also starting to connect with other people I saw doing research, right? Like another study that came out earlier this year that found in the first citywide study in St. Louis, they found that 46% of low-income women had to choose between a meal and period products regularly, right? And so I started connecting with them, but then also started connecting with companies who wanted to do research, getting the money together, and then getting a research pool to like actually do that, yeah. So the first one we did was with the Harris Poll and Thinks, and the second one we did was like Myovant Sciences, a biotech company, and Evidation that is surveying. Yeah.
So like a big part of this, like especially early on, is like just getting like tampons to women. Obviously those like you need a lot of tampons like over the course of the year. Did you like what has been your work with like getting women like diva cups and like
Yeah.
menstrual cups like that?
Yeah, so the question is about like the period products that we distribute. Yes, we distribute a lot of period products, and actually something I'm really proud of is when we started, 100% of our budget was buying period products. Now we spend $0 on products, so we work directly with all the major manufacturers, Tampax, Always, 7th Generation, Kotex, Ontflow. But we also started developing relationships with menstrual cup companies, so people who, it's a silicone cup that you put in your vagina, and there's, you know, it's a sustainable product, just go look it up. But Google it, you know. But so we decided we wanted to do some of the more of that sustainable work, and it was the same thing. It was working with, going to the founders on LinkedIn over and over again. And so now we distribute about 1,000 menstrual cups per month to people in need. Yeah.
So let's just do one more question. Okay, one more question if somebody has one.
Olivia?
Do you know how much it costs, like, for a woman over her lifetime buying period products?
Yeah. So, well, okay, first before I go on, like, I would urge that when we talk about people with periods, like what you'll hear me say is I try to say like menstruators or people with periods as much as possible, because a big part of our work is trying to be as gender inclusive as possible, right? So acknowledging that not all women menstruate, but not all menstruators are women, right? Some people might identify as trans or non-binary and still get their periods. All that to say, like, it's interesting because what we're seeing is that it really varies because it's not just the period products. And on average, the average person will use 17,000 units of period products in their lifetime. And why sustainability is important if you can afford it is because every disposable tampon or pad takes 5 to 8 centuries to decompose, right? So think about how much trash is going into the world, right? So a big part, no one really knows like what the cost is. Some people say it's like around 41,000 because it's not just the period products, but it's also like the Motrin and the chocolate and the birth control, the more underwear, all of those extra costs. But there's like a Huffington Post article that says $41,000, but I think it really varies. Yeah.